Restless. The younger son collected all his belongings and set off to a distant country. Luke chapter 15, verse 13. Luke 15 certainly speaks of the mercy of God. After the parable of the lost sheep, Jesus tells the parable of the lost coin. Again, a story of someone who loses something precious and searches without giving up until she finds it. These stories would have meant much to those listening to Jesus' words, especially those in the outer circle. But as powerful as those parables are, imagine how much more would have stirred in the hearts of those who listened to the parable of the prodigal son. The first part of the parable of the prodigal son describes the wayward wandering of a younger son who takes his inheritance and leaves the security of his home to set off to a distant country. Luke chapter 15, verse 13. As Jesus speaks of the young man's wanderings, you can imagine his eyes locked on the sinners who feel as if Jesus is reading their souls. As I imagine myself in the crowd that day, a question forms as I listen to Jesus. Why did the younger son leave? Later in his story, the father says to the older son, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours." Luke chapter 15, verse 31. Certainly, the generosity of his father would have been offered equally to both sons. As Jesus describes the father's heart, we imagine that both sons knew that everything that belonged to the father was theirs. So if the younger son lived with a father who wanted to share everything with him, why did he leave? What was so intriguing about life on the outside that it caused the younger son to leave a father who says, "All that is mine is yours"? Let us imagine that those on the outskirts of the crowd are asking the same question. Why did he leave the father? In reality, the sinners in the outermost circles probably identify with the younger son. Reflecting on their own lives as they listen to Jesus, perhaps they also ask themselves, why did I leave the father? The younger son, who is, in a sense, all of us, leaves because he is restless. For some of us, the things get too quiet in our lives. When we can't hear the voice of God, we listen to the voices within, the voices of temptation, accusation, and discouragement that we mentioned yesterday. But there is also a voice of fear that speaks in the silence. Some of us are afraid of loneliness. Some of us are afraid of failure. Some of us are afraid that we're not good enough. Whatever our fear is, when things get too quiet, we often listen to the voice of fear and we get restless. If we get the courage to look at our lives, perhaps we'll notice that what leads us into sin is restlessness within. Take courage and trust the process. Spend time today with Jesus and ask yourself, am I restless? When do I get restless? How do I act when I get restless? Your prayer. Stay here for an additional 10 minutes. Today pray with Luke chapter 15 verses 11 to 19. Be with Jesus as he looks at the tax collectors and sinners and speaks to them. How do they respond to Jesus? What stirs in your heart as Jesus speaks of the restless son who leaves? Why did the son leave his father? Why do you leave the father?